And I hope that I'm someone who always remains open and that I don't get so locked into, I mean, I think that's the postmodernism to, not get so put in a paradigm that you're not open to borrow from what's useful over here and what's useful from literature and other arenas, and you go to conferences that are not just within your ways of thinking. I mean, I'm feeling like our world would be better right now if there was more of that openness to differ and hold different ideas. So EMDR and some of the somatic work, it just has amplified the work in a way that clients are finding to be extremely usul.
I think there's those core narrative values, I would say, that inform the work about honoring the person's own vision of well-being and what they prefer, and constantly being a consultant to the person and attending to issues of power in the work, and the power of meaning making as an essential aspect, and then when those are central, then you can see about the other, see what other resources suit the person's vision.
And I think, of bringing things together, and I think it just feels like this is so much how we make meaning, how the brain works. Like we don't just stay with one thing, where we are. Pulling things together all the time, but pulling things together intentionally, like things that fit, or that resonate, or that sit with our ethical and political understandings. The understanding that people are knowledged and skilled, and we want to contribute to agency. So I think it's just such an exciting time. To hear of these, just to get more of the knowledge of how our bodies respond, and I think about Michael White and the way in which he drew from from philosophy, from sociology, cultural anthropology, feminism, and memory theory, Vygotsky, Russell Mears, learning theory, loss, and the impact of trauma. He was really into that stuff, and I think it is about seeing what all of those things contribute to practice, or how they support practice, or give another rendering of practice, another way of thinking about what we're doing, and that amplifying. I like this.
And at the same time, also, when we're incorporating those other things, to do so with a lot of thoughtfulness about, to deconstruct these other systems that we're integrating, and to really, when you talk about neurobiology or science, I mean, that's made up of stories. That's made up of knowledges that was constructed by people with particular privileges who had power to decide what we consider to be true, and that's kind of a constant, evolution. I mean, one of the things that's evolved in neurobiology is moving away from a more reductionistic, atomistic understanding of brain function to something that's more like what you were speaking about, Maggie, about like the interpersonal neurobiology and the ways in which there's oscillation and flow, and the complexity of these systems that we're working with, and also an appreciation of the natural, the movement toward well-being or toward healing, that can get interrupted, but that we're trying to help reintegrate, like meaning making itself, or other processes of healing, that are we're trying to
increase complexity.
That we're increasing complexity in terms of what we're doing, but to keep paying attention to what are the metaphors that's constituting the knowledge now, and how does that fit with our values and principles that we're using to guide us in narrative work.
And how about for you, Lynne, in terms of like linking and bridging and
I mean, I think philosophically, even though the EMDR community, there might be an emphasis on attachment theory and very different ideas and its language in very different ways. But the skills are very useful to me. So I've been trying to find ways to continue to center, clients' knowledges and abilities and use creativity, even taking EMDR and experimenting. And there's things I want to research, but I feel that it amplifies the work. It just opens up metaphor and possibility and healing. And I've been doing some interesting work with colleagues who they've been doing more of the narrative therapy, and I'll do adjunctive EMDR work, where in my own practice I move between the world. It's integrated in what I do and what I offer at any given time. But it's amazing to me what it makes possible.
Thinking about this era of integration and things being able to come together and from different modalities. How would you respond to some question about how is this different to just eclecticism?
For me, I'm not really as interested in being eclectic. Because it's important to me philosophically in terms of how I think about clients and problems and politics and what surrounds my work. But philosophically, I'm coming from the same place. Now, I may draw, I was trained in systems theory and modernist therapies, and I value my early training before narrative therapy came onto the scene. But it's from that philosophical home that I integrate practices and skills and what other fields have to offer. But I like to think that I'm trying to stay true to a way of working, a how. In how I'm privileging relational being over self-contained individualism, and how I'm privileging where we locate knowledge and expertise with clients, how I think about power relations in the room. So all of those things philosophically need to be true and resonant for me. Where eclecticism, I don't want to just have a hand in all these different places, but no umbrella, no foundation. You talk a lot about foundation in your work, and having that foundation to draw upon is really important to me.
I absolutely agree with Lynne about that philosophical grounding. That is central, and the appreciation of the social and relational and political. And who's the knowledged person. And the other thing that stays central to me is stories. That does this fit with that whole metaphor, and it is another metaphor, of making meaning through stories, and does this fit with what I know or can stretch and extend on in relation to story. I think the story metaphor can hold so much of human experience, and so for me, what we're talking about is stories always. Stories in a social, political, relational context, and that these other ways are amplifying or enhancing or resources.
For me, what's really different about integrating other approaches, into narrative as opposed to working eclectically, is that we're staying true to that, to story and narrative and the essence of meaning making. And I feel like that really is the main thing that distinguishes narrative practice from almost every other kind of psychotherapy and other treatments, is that we're privileging meaning making. And I love how Jerome Bruner always said, we're not just a concatenation of impulses and drives. We're making meaning, and when you privilege that in the form of story, then that's what we're doing.
And there's robust vocabularies in other communities. You know, like I think science has the most robust vocabulary for beauty. You know, when you hear physicists and mathematicians, and so just having an appreciation for what can we glean, what can we learn, or musicians, and yeah. Here is integrating the work has been hard. It was hard to move into this other world and try and figure out how do these worlds fit together. And I don't want to do that in isolation. It's nice to connect with other people who are trying to, how do we make sense of this and stay true to these philosophical tenets? So, if, I'm here, but I don't have eyes over theirs, that there's the resonance within my own work.
Yeah.
And that can be challenging when you're kind of integrating paradigms.
Yeah.
So I'm still, trying to make sense of what I'm seeing and what I'm witnessing, and how do I stay true to what, I found my philosophical home years ago when I discovered narrative therapy. And, how do it is where I want to live. But it's challenging to brave new world, to step outside.
I so look forward to hearing more about your work and hearing